let's talk about media and communication. We're going to be looking at Google News Initiative and its impact on journalism in Africa and in the Middle East. We welcome Mathias Santos from the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands and the Federal University of São Paulo in Brazil, who argues that Google News Initiative is building an infrastructure of power and dependency that could pose risks to responsible innovation in journalism. We question Mathias if this infrastructure could be used to control the flow of information and to undermine the independence of the news media. I'm Rodrigo Silva. Let's talk about media and communication. Mathias, welcome to our episode.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here on behalf of my co-authors to share a bit of what I've done in the last months, in years, to be honest.
Perfect. This research actually has featured in some news outlets throughout the world. So let us know about why this topic received so much attention.
Yeah, this is a really important topic. When we think about the media today, we know that there is like this very strong ties with big tech companies. And the big tech companies, mainly Facebook, which is Meta now, right? And Google. And this dependence on the big techs are putting the media, mainly the media innovation, at serious risk. And why? Because there is an imbalance of power dynamics that's a disadvantage for media organizations which are not that strong, don't have a lot of resources. And when we are talking about Africa and Middle East, this is particularly important because when we think about the studies, and they are generally focused on US, and then we have some of Europe as well. And we have another scenario. So a scenario that organizations tend to have more money and some people interested in paying for that. While in Africa, there are other more societal issues, and that would attract way more interest of these people than paying for news, for example. Although news are really important for the democratic issues that they have in this region, not only in Africa, but also Middle East and other parts in the global South. Besides that, there is also a large part of organizations that are really struggling to bring technological innovation to their newsrooms, and not only in Africa and Middle East, but around the globe. And I think that's one of the things that also attract attention, because these grants are the ones that they are using to deploying these technological innovations. And usually when we're talking about smaller news outlets, their money comes from philanthropic organizations, and they have their own agenda, their own interest. And usually it's not like helping these organizations to bring technology or emerging technologies like AI for their business model. And this is something that makes really hard for these organizations to deploying these new tools or solutions using these innovations or emerging technologies.
Mm-hmm. So, and the focus is on Africa, as you said, this geographical context with a completely different financial, economic context. So when you started this research, what were you hoping to find here? So what was your expectation when you started the research?
Oh, yeah. When we started doing this, that was more to understand what is the technological innovation in this region. But then we faced a lot of issues, because first we saw that there is Africa is a really big continent, and you have like very different level of developments in the country. And as we are covering Africa and Middle East, this is also another issue, because we have way more research in the Middle East than Africa. So the first thing that was really surprising for us is that like Middle East are trying to bring these emerging technologies, as I mentioned, AI, like in really like strong projects that use machine learning and other subfields of AI. While in Africa, some of these projects were really basic and trying to bring this basic technology to like somehow strong their strategy, their digital strategy. There was one project that I remember, and it was one of the first that we conducted an interview, and they were really trying to establish a website, CMS, that could connect the requests for because they're like collecting pitching from young journalists, and they didn't have that. They were using before like simple Google Forms, and then they have like this website so they could showcase what they are doing. This is something basic, and when you look for what are being developed in other newsrooms, we're like trying, like, for example, in Lebanon, we have a newsroom that was, although they were struggling because of the language, was really challenged. they were trying to like using machine learning to understand what are being disseminated about disinformation and misinformation, Twitter, for example. And so this discrepancy of the level of development and technology in this project were something that really attracted my attention. And the other thing that was like a bit surprise to me, but not really a surprise, but it was really emphasized by the respondents, was the lack of like staff that they could hire to work in this organization, because they were competing with fintechs or organizations that are in US and Europe, which the salaries are way higher, and these grants are co-funded. So part of this money comes from the organization, which is really hard for them. So, and then when they need to put like really high salaries, these grants are really short. And so that's another thing that I was like really surprised throughout the process. And we are expecting to hear a lot of the struggles to have these people on board paying their salaries, but not competing with other industries that are way more stronger than the news media.
Of course. So we have, in one way, a diverse background in newsrooms that you found in your interviews, this lack as well of financial capacity. So let us know now, after all this, the most important findings of your research.
Yes. So the main findings is that, in our opinion, these big techs are the main custodians of the cutting edge technologies that we have today. So what happened, for example, in artificial intelligence, that is now everyone's talking about after the buzz of this generative AI. So they have muscles to develop that, deploy that. And when we are talking about media, so they need to learn that, bring to their business model. And then when we talk about the structure of these organizations, they don't have technological teams that are really focused on bringing these technologies. So these grants help them to hire these people, but it is just for 1 year. So it's really short period of time. So when you see the description of the project, they seems like very interesting, very complex. But then when they get the grant and then they start implementing this project, they realize that these projects are way more complex than what they proposed back there. And what happened is that they need to make this a minimum viable product, or what I mean by that. So a small version of that, test that, and trying to see how they can continue deploying this project further. Although some of these projects were still available, we saw that some of them still have bugs, and they really require money to continue expanding on that and work on that. So that's something that I believe that one of the main findings of this project is trying to see how these organizations can continue to develop this emerging technology, which is going to be really important in media innovation in general for their business strategies. And when we see like these projects, there is a huge potential to bring some news, but part of the news value chain to change that and help journalists to focus on other tasks. But without the money and the support for a long term, these projects will end. And some of the examples that we found there was like that. So they couldn't continue that later because the money was not enough. And also, as I mentioned, like requiring them to pay higher salaries and really specialized skills that sometimes is really hard for them to have that inside the newsrooms or even inside their country. And then they need to go to other countries to hire these people. And last thing that I think it's really important to highlight is that these organizations need to train these people as well for they understand what is journalism, how they could work with journalism. And this requires a lot of time. So during this 1 year, so they need to put these people that are really from the tech background to understand what is journalism, what are the news projects that they're trying to develop. But then after 1 year, they cannot continue paying their salaries, and then they go to other industry. And it's also an investment that is going and like being thrown away. Yeah, so these are some of the main findings, but yeah, definitely you can find more on our paper.
Of course, this makes me brainstorm a bit, brainstorm together about potential practical implications that we can look at from now on. So is there something that either the governments or any organizations can do to empower more the newsroom, or is there something that the newsroom by themselves can do to empower themselves, or something connected to this question of media literacy that you're also addressing? So I'm curious to know about policy implications now. What can you tell us?
Yes, definitely. There's a lot of policy implications for that. First is like in relation to big tech companies. I think governments can like push them to like if they are financed the journalism, they are paying for the journalism, they pay properly. It's not only these small grants or programs that are bringing training for them, but something that is more structured. At the same time, I think organizations also need to work together to be strong. And then when they have these organizations, that these big tech companies that have a lot of power, that's the only way that they can like try to balance this power. And I think media innovation is going to be something really important for the future of media. And I think working together, they can diminish these barriers to develop some of this project and also exchange resources that are not easy to find, as I was mentioning. And lastly, I think it's really important we rethink about AI and technology and thinking that this is really important to have in the curriculums of like these journalism courses, and also prepare journalists that are already in the market for they understand what is AI, because it's not about only understanding what is AI, but how you can bring that for the news product. And trying to bridge these two topics, it's quite complex and not only requires time for structural understanding what is being deployed around the world, but also it's important for these professionals to understand what are the issues that they can tackle using these AI solutions and what is not possible. Because sometimes there is also this trend to, everything you need to use AI or emerging technologies, or everything you need to use technology to solve, but it's not necessary. And only if you have the knowledge and the research necessary, you can do that and in a proper way.
And what are some hints for future research? Because there's a bit of subtopics here that we could address. So looking ahead, research-wise, so what are some hints for future research now?
Definitely, there is a lot of topics that could be explored. For example, one thing that we are trying to explore further, because this is part of a large project, is see how these technologies are being deployed with these grants around the world, and mainly in the global south, because something that happened with specifically with the Google News Initiative Innovation Challenge, it started mainly in Latin America, North America, and then Africa, Middle East, and then Asia Pacific. Europe now has a version of that. And so you see a lot of projects being deployed in using these grants, but what are the differences across these regions? What are the countries that are bringing these emerging technologies? How they are using that? So what are the best practices that other organizations can learn from that? So that's something that we're trying to look first from the global south perspective. It would be very interesting to look also in North America, because it's a lot of grants that were being given to this region that is not North America, but also only US and Canada. So it's the region that has a different like media ecosystem. It's quite local news. It's quite strong in some regions, and you see a lot of money going to that. Also, it's really important to understand like how these emerging technologies, we have this imbalance of power, and how these infrastructure are being deployed by these organizations, and how these organizations are influencing media companies. Because some of these tools are really complex, and you have to train data and etc. And media organizations don't have all the research to do that. And how we can like collaborate with this big tech, and how they can like somehow help these organizations with their infrastructure and the power that they have to train data, and like something that would be more useful for media. And I think there's also a lot of to explore in relation to the literacy, as we were discussing, how these different regions, different countries are understanding the AI literacy. And for example, some of these countries, they didn't receive any grant from Google. And why they are not receiving? They are not aware of, because you need to propose, right, to Google. And they're struggling to understand how to bring these emerging technologies to their newsrooms. And if so, how we can help them to understand the use of that, and how we can prepare them for the future, because otherwise they will always be like running to like competing with other organizations that are way more developed than them.
Of course. I mentioned before that this research was featured in some news outlets around the world. For those who are watching us on the Let's Talk About Media and Communication website, below the video, you will have access to some of these resources. And Mathias, I would like to ask you now if there is any other material that you could share with our listeners to further explore this topic.
Definitely. So one of my co-authors, Harris, he wrote a really interesting article looking for all the grants that were being given by these two big techs around the world is something that's very interesting. There's a lot of discussion about the media capture from this big tech, which is something I also recommend people read about that. And also about this power imbalance of big techs and news organizations. There are a lot of books on that. But yeah, I'm happy to feel free to reach me out, and then I can also share some other links.
Perfect.
Thank you for the invitation.
Sure. So we have tried to approach a very wide, complex topic here, but I would like to close this episode by asking you to tell us in 1 or 2 sentences, what should our audience remember about this talk? So what's the punchline?
Yes. So what people should remember about this topic is that it's something that is not easy to solve. But I think it's really important we start discussing about that, and mainly from a perspective from regions that are not being really considered or studied. And in this case, Africa and Middle East give a lot of insights about that, because it's a region with different level of development using this technology. And so if we start discussing that, and also about the infrastructure of big techs, I think it's the first step to change that, and also help these organizations to prepare them for the future using media innovation, technology, and etc.
Mathias, it was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
This podcast is powered by Cogitatu Press. You can listen to this episode on the Let's Talk About Media and Communication website, on Cogitatu Press YouTube channel, and whatever you get your podcast.